The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland of Varela. Snow whipped in all directions, making it hard to see even a few steps ahead. The sky was dark, filled with thick clouds that blocked the sun. Ice covered everything: trees, rocks, even the broken metal pieces of an old crashed ship. It was the kind of storm that could kill a man in minutes. John Walker, a human surveyor from Earth, moved slowly through the snow. His face was red and frozen, his beard covered in ice. He had crashed here during a solo mission just 2 days ago. His small shuttle was damaged beyond repair. Now he was looking for shelter, food, and any sign of life. He could barely feel his fingers as he held his scanner. Suddenly, a sound reached his ears. It was soft, like a whimper, almost lost in the wind. John stopped and listened, turning his head in the direction of the sound. There it was, again, a weak cry. High-pitched and desperate, cautiously, he walked toward the sound. Step by step, his boots crunched on the thick snow. Behind a large, snow-covered rock, he saw something that made him freeze. It was a child, an alien child. She was small, with bluish skin and glowing violet eyes. She sat curled in the snow, shaking badly. Her hands wrapped around her knees. She wore nothing but thin fabric. Now, frozen stiff from the cold, tears ran down her cheeks, but they turned to ice before they could fall. John's heart twisted inside his chest. No creature should suffer like this, not even an alien. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey," he said gently, "can you hear me?" The girl looked up, her lips blue and trembling. She didn't speak, but her eyes locked onto his. There was pain in them, but also trust. John quickly took off his backpack. Inside was one thermal blanket. His last one. He wrapped it around the girl and picked her up carefully. She was light as a feather and cold like ice. He didn't think twice. His crashed pod wasn't far. He hurried back, the child in his arms. Each step was harder than the last, but the weight in his arms gave him strength. He had to save her, no matter what. The wind blew harder, biting into his skin. Snow piled on his shoulders, and in his hood. The girl stopped crying. Resting her head against his chest, John looked down. Her eyes were closed. He shook her gently. "Stay with me," he whispered. "We're almost there." Finally, he reached the crash site. The door to the shuttle was frozen shut. He kicked it hard, once. Twice, then it opened with a loud creak. Inside, it was dark and cold, but safer than outside. He stepped in, closed the door, and laid the girl on the padded seat. John turned on the emergency heater. The red light blinked, weak, but working. He added a heat pack under the blanket around her. Her skin slowly began to warm. Her shaking lessened. He sat beside her, breathing hard, his own body weak. She opened her eyes and looked at him again. Slowly, she reached out and touched his face. John was surprised but stayed still. She drew a small circle in the frost on the wall beside her. Then she added line symbols John remembered from an old Alliance report. She was one of the Elyaria species believed to be extinct, wiped out in a war no one spoke of anymore. Yet here she was, alive and crying in the ice. John felt a chill not from the cold, but from the realization this child wasn't just a survivor. She was a secret the galaxy had forgotten. He stared at the symbols, then at her face. "Who are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer, just reached for his hand. He held it gently. Her fingers small and still cold. Something passed between them in that moment, bond beyond words. Outside, the storm howled louder. But inside the ruined pod, a new silence settled, one of quiet hope. John didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He would protect her, no matter what. Even if it meant going against everything he knew. John sat in the dim interior of the broken survey pod. The heater hummed weakly, barely strong enough to warm the air. He watched the alien child wrapped tightly in the thermal blanket. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and shallow. She looked fragile, like she could disappear if the cold touched her again. He moved closer to her and gently touched her forehead. It wasn't as cold as before, which gave him a little hope. Still, he knew this pod wouldn't keep them alive forever. The energy core was almost drained. Soon the heater would shut down and the cold would return. John opened a compartment and pulled out his emergency rations. He chewed slowly on a dry food bar, watching her the entire time. Then he noticed movement. Her eyes fluttered open. She blinked slowly and looked around, confused but calm. Her gaze landed on John, and she didn't pull away. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small metal cup. He poured a little warm water from the heater's reserve and held it near her lips. She sniffed it first, then took a slow sip. Her hand shook, but she drank it all. John smiled. "You're strong," he whispered. She pointed at the wall again, drawing more symbols in the frost. John leaned in, trying to understand, this time. She drew a small circle, then placed a dot in the center. She tapped the dot twice and looked up at him. He frowned, trying to remember the meaning. Suddenly, it hit him. That symbol wasn't just random, it was the ancient Elyari emblem for home. The dot in the center meant a royal child. John's eyes widened. "You're important," he muttered. She didn't speak, but nodded slowly. Confirming his thought, he leaned back, his mind spinning. He had found an alien child, cold and lost. But not just any child. She was possibly the heir of a lost race. And now? She was in his care. The sound of metal creaking outside broke his thoughts. He jumped to his feet and checked the scanner. Red blips moved on the screen. Drones, at least 2. Not rescue bots, these were stealth drones. Black Ops, they were. Looking for something or someone, John turned off the scanner and looked back at the child. She had curled up tighter, fear in her eyes. She knew, somehow, what they were. He quickly pulled a panel open under the seat. It was a storage space, just big enough for her. "Get in here," he whispered. She hesitated, but obeyed, crawling. Inside the narrow space, he gave her a pack of heat gel and closed the hatch softly. The pod went quiet again, just the low hum of dying power. Then a sharp knock echoed across the outer hall. John didn't move. He grabbed his plasma cutter from the tool rack and waited. The knock came again, then the hiss of melting metal. They were cutting into the door. John moved to the side, hiding in the shadows. The door opened with a harsh whine. A small flying drone entered, scanning the pod with blue light. It hovered slowly, searching every corner. John held his breath, keeping still. When it floated near him, he lunged with one clean strike. He slammed the plasma cutter into the drone. Sparks flew, and it dropped to the floor. Another drone zipped in, but John was ready. He used the door's auto-close button, trapping it halfway inside. The drone sparked and crashed as the door sealed tight. Silence returned once again. John breathed heavily, heart pounding. He opened the seat hatch and pulled the girl out. She looked at the broken drone and then at him. Tears formed in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, she hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. John hesitated, then gently placed his hand on her back. They stood there, not saying a word, but both knew there wasn't much. Time left. More drones would come, stronger ones. He opened the map on his cracked wrist device. There was an old mining station a few kilometers away. Maybe it still had power. Maybe communication systems. It was their only chance. He looked at her and nodded. "We have to go." He packed quickly water packs, emergency flares, tools. He wrapped her in more blankets, tying them tight with straps. Then he opened the door to the blizzard outside. The wind hit him like a wall, but he stepped forward, carrying her close. Behind them, the wreckage of the pod faded into the snow. Ahead, the white storm waited. Full of danger and silence, John didn't look back. He tightened his grip on her and kept walking, one step at a time, toward the unknown. The snowstorm thickened around them. John could barely see a few feet ahead. His legs were tired, and his boots were heavy with ice, but he kept moving forward, one step at a time. The alien child lay against his chest, wrapped in blankets, barely. Moving, her soft breath fogged up the cloth near his neck. She was still alive but weak. John looked down at her, his arms aching. They had walked for nearly 2 hours, and still. The old mining station was nowhere in sight. He stopped to rest behind a rock shaped like a giant claw. The wind howled overhead, but the stone gave them cover. He pulled out a heat pack and rubbed it between his hands. The warmth was small, but he placed it inside the child's blanket. She stirred slightly and opened her eyes for a moment. Then John heard something strange. A faint humming, almost like buzzing, coming from the sky. He stood up quickly, peering through the snow. In the distance, he saw lights red and blue, moving fast. His heart sank. "Drones," he muttered. He ducked low and turned off his wrist beacon. If those were the same Black Ops drones, they were tracking him. Not to rescue but to silence. They couldn't allow this child to survive. She was a witness, maybe even a target. John scanned the snowy ground and found a path leading into a narrow valley. It wasn't on the map, but it might lead them away from the patrol route. He picked her up again and moved quickly. The valley was filled with jagged rocks and ice pillars, perfect for hiding, but also dangerous. The humming grew louder. He pressed his back to the ice wall and waited. One of the drones flew overhead. Scanning the area with a red laser, John didn't move, holding his breath. The laser passed inches from his shoulder and moved on. He waited until the drone vanished behind the cliffs. Then he moved again, faster now. Suddenly, a sharp whirring noise came from above. Another drone swooped down, its sensors blinking rapidly. John dived behind a snow mound, covering the girl. With his body, the drone hovered above them, scanning the area. Then, without warning, it fired a warning shot into the ground. The snow exploded, sending shards of ice into the air. John rolled to the side and grabbed a flare from his belt. He lit it and threw it to the far right. The light exploded in a red flash. The drone followed it instantly. Mistaking it for movement, John didn't wait. He picked up the girl and ran through the narrow pass, his boots slipping on the ice as he pushed forward. Behind him, the drone discovered the trick and gave chase. Its alarm echoed through the cliffs. Alerting the others, John slid down a small ridge. Nearly falling, he landed hard, rolling in the snow, but held onto the girl tightly. His back hurt. His hands were bleeding, but he kept going. Up ahead, a shadow appeared, a large, dark cave. Without thinking, he rushed toward it and ducked inside. The drone zoomed past, unable to detect their heat signature anymore. Inside the cave, it was silent and black. Only the soft sound of dripping water echoed through the walls. John placed the girl down carefully and collapsed beside her. His chest rose and fell as he tried to catch his breath. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. John nodded slowly, trying to calm her. "We're okay." For now, he checked the map again. The mining station was still about 3 kilometers northeast, but with drones searching and the child so weak, the journey had just become harder. Suddenly, she reached into her blanket and pulled out a small, glowing object. It looked like a crystal, pulsing gently with light. She held it up to his chest, and the light touched his skin. For a moment, John felt a strange warmth. Not just heat, but something deeper, like calm flowing through his blood. His pain faded slightly, and the bleeding from his hand slowed. He stared at the child in shock. "What is that?" She looked down and then back at him, her voice weak and soft. Whispered a single word. "Guardian." It was the first time she had spoken. John's heart skipped a beat. He didn't understand it fully, but something had changed outside. The snow continued to fall. The drones passed by, unable to detect them in the cave. But John knew they couldn't hide forever. Soon the real hunters would arrive. Ones who didn't need machines to track them. He looked at the child and took a deep breath. "No more running," he whispered. "We find the station, we send a message, and we end this." The child nodded slowly, still holding the glowing crystal. And in that cold, dark cave, the fire of resistance began to burn. The cave was dark, cold, and full of echoes, but it had kept them alive through the night. John opened his eyes slowly, feeling the ache in his muscles. Snow had blown in through the cave mouth, covering the ground with a thin, white layer. He sat up and checked on the alien child. She was still sleeping, the glowing crystal tucked in. Her hands, its soft light, kept them warm, in a way he couldn't explain. John wasn't sure if it was technology or something more, but it worked, and that was all that mattered. He took a breath and checked his wrist device. The battery was low, and the signal was dead, but the map still glowed weakly, showing their position. The mining station was 2.5 kilometers northeast. John stood up and brushed the snow off his jacket. They had to move before the drones came back. He gently shook the girl awake. She blinked slowly, then sat up without fear. She seemed stronger today, her violet eyes more alert. John handed her some water and wrapped her tightly in the blanket again. Then he packed their things and nodded toward the light outside the cave. They stepped back into the frozen world. The storm had calmed, but the cold still bit into their skin. The wind whispered over the hills like a warning. John pulled his hood tighter and kept walking. He carried the child in his arms, her head resting on his chest. The snow crunched under his boots. Every step forward felt like dragging stone, but the thought of safety kept him going. He kept checking the map, watching the distance grow smaller. 1 kilometer, then half, then closer. Suddenly, the ground beneath him cracked. A deep sound echoed under his feet, ice-breaking. He jumped back just in time. The ground collapsed into a hidden tunnel of ice. He held the child tightly as they fell. They hit a smooth slope and slid fast. Snow and ice flew around them as they spiraled down. John tried to control the fall, twisting his body to protect the girl. Finally, they landed at the bottom with a heavy thud. It was cold, dark, and silent. John groaned and sat up, checking the girl first. She was safe, her eyes wide but unhurt. He looked around, realizing they were trapped. Tall ice walls rose all around them. The tunnel was too steep to climb back out the way they came. "Perfect," he muttered. He scanned the cave walls, looking for a way up. The only possible path was a narrow ledge on one side. If he could climb that, he might reach the top. But he couldn't take the girl with him. He looked at her. Then, at the ledge again, she placed her hand on his and nodded. She understood Evan without words. John took off his pack and set it down beside her. He gave her one of the emergency flares and said, "Stay here. I'll be back." She gripped the flare tightly and sat on a soft patch of snow. John took a deep breath and began to climb. The ice was slippery and sharp. His fingers bled as he pulled himself up. Every time he slipped, he thought of her waiting below. Finally, after a painful climb, he reached the top. The snow was deeper here, but the mining station was now visible. In the distance, a few lights still blinked on the outer wall. John smiled, hope filling his chest. He turned and looked back down into the pit. She was still there, tiny and still. He tied a rope to a nearby rock and lowered it down. "Hold on," he shouted. She reached for it and wrapped it around her waist. Slowly, John pulled her up. It took all his strength, but he didn't stop when she reached the top. He dropped to his knees, exhausted. She leaned against him, placing the glowing crystal over his heart. The warmth filled him again, easing the pain. John looked at her with tired eyes. "You're full of surprises," he whispered. "Together." They moved toward the station. The wind was rising again. But the building was close now. Lights blinked on a satellite dish. Maybe the comms still worked. The door was frozen shut, but John managed to pry it open. Inside, it was dark, but there was power. He placed the child near a broken chair and rushed to the control panel. The screen flickered, then lit up. John sent out a distress signal, a coded message meant for human patrols. Then he slumped into the chair beside her. They had made it, but outside in the white distance, a shadow moved. The hunters were still out there, and they were coming. Inside the mining station, the silence felt strange. The walls were old, scratched, and covered in frost. John's breath came out in white clouds as he stared at the blinking screen. The message had been sent, an emergency call to the nearest human outpost. Now, all they could do was wait. The alien child sat beside him, her legs tucked under the blanket. She was watching the screen with calm, quiet eyes. John glanced at her and whispered, "Help is coming." She didn't reply. But her gaze never left the control panel. Her small fingers touched the crystal around her neck, and it glowed softly. John tried to access more systems. Most were offline. Security, heating, and water filtration were broken. Only one emergency light blinked faintly near the roof. But the communication dish outside had survived a storm. That was their only lifeline now. He stood up and checked the room. There were broken crates, rusted tools, and shattered glass. Nothing useful for defense. He moved quietly, searching each corner with care. In the back room, he found a half-working plasma torch. It wasn't a weapon, but it could slow down anything that tried to enter. John returned to the main room and looked at the child. She was now standing in front of the screen. The symbols had changed. New ones were glowing across the panel. He frowned. "I didn't touch anything." She looked at him and pointed. John moved closer and saw something he didn't expect. The transmission had bounced. Someone else had picked it up, but it wasn't human. The signal was being traced by an alien vessel, and it was already nearby. His chest tightened. "No," he whispered. He turned off the comms panel quickly and disabled the beacon. But it was too late. The signal had gone out into deep space, and someone was already on their way. He looked at the girl. "Did you do this?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she touched the console again. A hologram flickered to life, showing a strange, royal-looking symbol. It wasn't just a random ship that had received the signal. It was a flag, an ancient symbol of the El Yori royal line. John stared at it, his heart pounding. "You called your people," he said slowly. She nodded once. He dropped into a chair and rubbed his face. This wasn't just about survival anymore. If the El Yari royal family still existed, and if this girl was part of it, then John hadn't just saved a life, he had saved a legacy. But with that legacy came enemies. Powerful enemies. Outside, the ground rumbled softly. John rushed to the window and saw black ships gliding low through the snow. Not the alien royal ship, not yet. These were smaller, darker, silent killers. Drones or soldiers from the faction that wanted her dead. He turned back and grabbed the plasma torch. Then he looked at the child. "If they get in here, we're done," he said. She stared at him, then stepped forward and pressed her palm to the metal door. The crystal on her necklace glowed brighter. A soft hum filled the air. The broken walls began to light up with old El Yari symbols. Lines of energy ran across the walls like veins. The room vibrated, and the old ceiling lights flickered on. John stepped back, shocked. The girl was activating something. Something buried deep in the mining station's systems. Then a deep tone echoed through the base, an ancient El Yari defense code. The ground shook again, but this time not from the enemy. It was coming from under the station. Metal doors opened in the floor. Old El-Yari machines rose from hidden. Chambers round drones glowing with light. They hovered silently. Circling the girl like guardians, John watched in disbelief. "You brought them back to life." She turned to him and finally spoke again. "Not me, my blood." The attackers outside began cutting through the outer wall. John raised his torch, but one of the El-Yari drones moved in front of him. It projected a shield just as the door exploded inward. Dark soldiers rushed inside, but were hit instantly by beams of blue energy. They fell, stunned, before they could fire a single shot. More drones flew through the room, scanning and defending. The girl stood still, her eyes glowing faintly now. John ran to her, covering her as more explosions rocked the building. She didn't flinch. She was focused, connected to the ancient machines. Outside, a flash lit up the sky. John turned and looked through the broken wall. A massive alien ship was descending, graceful and golden. Not black, not violent. This one looked like it belonged to a royal court. The signal had worked. But now, things were far more complicated than he ever imagined. Asterisk, the golden ship hovered silently above the mining station. Its surface shimmered like firelight trapped in glass. Snow melted around it in wide circles, pushed away by invisible energy. John stood at the shattered doorway, watching with awe and caution. The alien child stood beside him, still glowing faintly. The soldiers who had attacked were now unconscious, scattered across the room. The El-Yari drones floated calmly above them, like silent protectors. John had never seen technology like this, an ancient, elegant, and powerful. The child looked up at the ship and whispered something in her language. Then she stepped forward. Toward the snowy clearing outside, John hesitated, but followed her. The golden ship began to descend slowly. Lowering its ramp, a group of tall, armored figures stepped out, their faces hidden behind curved helmets. They moved with grace, not aggression. One stepped ahead of the others, her cloak flowing like liquid silk. She removed her helmet, revealing a face that looked like the child's, only older and wiser. Her skin was smooth and pale blue, her violet eyes full of emotion. She dropped to her knees in the snow and opened her arms wide. The child ran forward without fear and leaped into her embrace. The woman wept quietly. Holding her close, John watched, confused but relieved. This must be her mother or someone very close. The woman looked up at him with tears in her eyes. She spoke softly, her voice like music. "You kept her alive." John nodded slowly. Not knowing what else to say, the woman stood and stepped toward him. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a glowing crystal. She offered it to him with both hands. John hesitated. "What is this?" She replied, "A seal of honor from the house of El-Yor." John took it carefully. Feeling warmth rush into his fingers, the crystal pulsed once, and his vision blurred for a second. He saw flashes, images of cities in the sky, ancient wars, and the child's face crying in the snow. Then it stopped, and everything returned to normal. He looked at the woman, unsure what had just happened. She placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You are now remembered, John Walker of Earth." He blinked, surprised she knew his name. "Wait, how do you know who I am?" She smiled gently. "The girl showed us. She is bonded to you now, through survival and spirit." Before he could speak, another ship appeared in the sky. This one was silver sleek, sharp and cold. It dropped fast, landing on the other side of the clearing. The El-Yari guards immediately raised their weapons. John stepped back, instinct warning him from the silver ship. A group of masked figures stepped out. Their movements were mechanical, no grace, no warmth. One of them raised a device and spoke in a harsh tone. "That child belongs to the Galactic Council. She is a classified entity. Hand her over." The El-Yari woman's expression hardened. She stepped in front of the child and raised her hand. A blue barrier of light formed between the two groups. "She belongs to no council," the woman said firmly. "She is my daughter and the last blood of Elior." Tension filled the air like thunder. John looked at both sides, unsure of what was coming. The masked soldiers began to power up their weapons. John grabbed the plasma torch again. Ready to defend, the child stepped forward and spoke, her voice steady and calm. "No more fighting," she said. Everyone froze. Her voice echoed unnaturally. Like many voices layered as one, the glowing crystal around her neck floated into the air. Light burst from it, bright and blinding. When the light faded, the silver ship soldiers had dropped their weapons. They stood still, frozen in place. One of them whispered, "It's true. She's the one of flame and frost." They slowly backed away and returned to their ship. Without a word, they left, disappearing into the clouds. The Eliar woman turned to John, her eyes shining. "She has awakened the old power," she said. John looked at the child, who now looked calm but exhausted. He walked over and knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" She nodded once, then leaned into him for support. The Eliari guards lowered their weapons. Snow began to fall softly again. The golden ship opened its side doors and warm lights spilled into the cold air. The woman gestured for John to come. "With them, you will be honored on Eliar. You saved our future." John looked at the ship, then at the snowy ruins of the station. He had come here for a simple survey, but now he was part of something far bigger than he could understand. He took the child's hand and walked toward the ship, and together they stepped into the light. The golden ship rose into the sky, slow and silent. Its hull shimmered against the stars, cutting through the clouds like a dream. John stood at the viewing bay, watching the frozen world of Varela grow smaller below them. Snowstorms still danced across the surface, but inside the ship it was warm, calm, and full of light. The alien child sat beside him, wrapped in a soft silver robe. She was no longer weak or shaking. She looked peaceful, strong, in a quiet way. She held the crystal gently in her hand, its glow steady and soft. John watched her in silence, still trying to believe everything that had happened. Only days ago, he had crashed on a frozen world. Now, he was standing inside a starship belonging to an ancient royal race. He looked at the stars and let out a slow breath. Everything had changed, and yet he still felt like the same man, the one who had chosen to save a crying child. Footsteps echoed behind him. The Eliari woman, tall and regal, stepped forward with a warm smile. "We will arrive at the capital in 2 hours," she said. "You will be received as a guest of honor." John shifted awkwardly. "I'm just a surveyor," he said. "You are more than that," she replied. "You are the protector of the flame." He didn't fully understand what the title meant, but the way she said it made his chest feel heavier, like he was carrying something sacred. He looked back at the child, who was now humming a soft tune. "Will she be safe now?" he asked. The woman nodded. "She is the last of our royal blood. But not just that, she carries the spirit of our people, our technology, and our ancient magic. She is the bridge between the old world and the new." John listened. Quietly, unsure what to say, the woman placed a hand on his shoulder. "She chose you," she said. "She could have died in the storm, but your kindness woke something in her. Something even we had forgotten." John looked at the child again, and this time he smiled. The rest of the journey passed in silence. The stars drifted by, the window glowing like slow-moving fireflies. Then the ship slowed. Outside, a large space station came into view, massive and beautiful. Golden towers and floating rings surrounded it. Pulsing with blue light, they docked smoothly. And the doors opened to a bright hallway. John followed the Eliari into the heart of the station. Strange beings bowed as they passed. Music played softly from walls made of crystal and wind. He had never seen anything like it, graceful, alive, and welcoming at the central chamber. A crowd of Eliari nobles stood waiting. They moved aside as the child entered. She walked slowly to a raised platform and stood still. The woman stepped. Forden spoke loudly. "She has returned," she said, her voice echoing across the chamber. She was found in the storm, nearly lost but protected by one who asked for nothing. She turned and looked at John. This human risked everything for a stranger, and in doing so, saved a people. The nobles bowed their heads in silence. Then, the child stepped forward and took John's hand. She raised it high, her eyes glowing softly. The room lit up with light as the crystal in her hand floated into the air. Symbols filled the walls and shone stories, names, and history. John's name appeared in their language, written in golden light. He didn't understand the words, but he felt their meaning after the ceremony. John stood alone at a balcony. He watched the stars again, quiet and thoughtful. The Eliari woman joined him. Holding a small silver box, she opened it, revealing a tiny glowing stone. "This is for you," she said. "A gift from our people." "What is it?" he asked. "A memory stone," she replied. "It holds your story every moment from the storm to now." John took it gently, his hands trembling a little. "It's too much," he whispered. "No," she said. "It's just enough. You changed a life, and through her, you changed the galaxy." John looked at the stone, then back at the stars. He didn't want riches or titles, but knowing that the child was safe, that was enough for him. The woman looked at him once more. "You can stay with us if you wish," she said. John shook his head with a smile. "No, I need to go back to Earth, to my life, but I'll carry this memory forever." She nodded in understanding. "You will always have a place among us," she said. John turned one last time to look at the child. She waved at him, smiling brightly, and in that moment, the storm, the pain, the fear, it all felt worth it. As his transport ship left the station, John looked down at the memory stone in his hand. It glowed gently, full of warmth, a small reminder that even in the coldest place, a single act of kindness could change everything.